7th and 8th grade, welcome to content day 3 of your second to last week of the school year. You are almost there, and I am so proud of each of you for your hard work and your willingness to be flexible in this unique time. Yesterday, we saw the first of 3 humanistic worldviews. These are ways of thinking that center around humans instead of God. And we learned that this is a recipe for disaster, as humanity is sinful to the core. After talking about secularism, today's video is all about Marxism. Marxism. Now, Marxism is the only worldview that is named after a person. And the person is Karl Marx. This man was famously rude, but not only that, his unwillingness to bathe or get a haircut was also legendary. I mean, look at this picture of Karl Marx. Pretty intimidating, right? On February 21st, 1848, Marx published the Communistic Manifesto. It was a pretty bloodthirsty call for the working class to revolt against its leaders. The key idea here was that all of a nation's funds get taken away from the rich and then are being able to be run through one centralized government for the good of all the working people. Now, on this side of history, we have overwhelming evidence that communism in the 20th century did not work. It killed twice the amount of dead combined from World War I and World War II. The Marxist worldview that fuels communism is still around to this day. The world's 5 communistic countries account for approximately 1 out of every 5 people on the planet. So mathematically speaking, there was a 20% chance that you would have been born into a communistic nation. Now, before we dive in any further, we must note that socialism, a term you might have heard, and communism are not one and the same. In communism, socialistic principles are bundled together to benefit dictators or a communistic state. That is where this worldview goes terribly wrong. In God's Word, we see that the Israelites are given many socialistic principles on how to take care of those that were weak, on how to centralize worship, and how to receive, honestly, a lot of taxes. Don't forget that in a worldview analysis, we recognize bias, we thoroughly study a worldview, and we respectfully respond. We don't wholesale write something off because of its name. As we go along, we'll be sure to observe these socialistic principles in action, as well as trace back to who they serve, if it's God or an atheistic state. And based on that, we'll determine if something is right or wrong. Now, Marxists, together with the following communistic worldview, believe that there is no God. They are atheistic, and they see the state as the representatives of the working class, and therefore them being the highest authority. And because of that, they would often follow the evolution theory for explaining the existence of the world around us. That's how they think that we got here. Now, secondly, they believe that humanity is nothing more than matter in motion. Now, that being said, Karl Marx did observe problems in this world. He was very aware of suffering, of sickness, of human loss, and of people being taken advantage of. Now, Karl Marx saw the problem with society not as moral, as a sin problem, but as economic. Marxism does not believe that there is such a thing as sin. Instead, the guilty ones, the problem, are the exploiters. In fact, there's no salvation aside from them being overthrown, which will lead to a society's transformation into communism. As our textbook for this worldview segment says, at every step along the way, Marxists see the human problem as someone else's problem. Poverty's owners are devilish, and the propertyless workers, they are saints. Now, the solution, again according to this worldview, is the making of a communistic society through a revolution. In this revolution, the established leaders must be overthrown and even killed. Once this communistic state is set, the working class government would be able to slurp up all of the nation's material, their money, and their workers, and then turn around and distribute it fairly among those that it served. That sounds great, right? But you probably guessed it. Once the people in power controlled all of the money, all the land, all the people, they did not eagerly use it for the common good, but instead they rather kept it for themselves. Next question, the purpose of life. Well, the purpose of life is to give freedom to the working class. It is to overthrow those that are in power and to experience your nation under communistic rule. But if the people that joyfully accepted communism could have looked ahead to the following chapters in history, they would have seen that their purpose in life had not changed, but simply had shifted. Instead of submitting to the tyranny of a factory boss, they now side under the tyranny of a communistic ruler. Their focus had simply shifted. The way of living was roughly the same. In our previous video, we saw that secularists have no concept of life after death because they desire a religionless state that has no room for God. Man is the highest authority, and man's life does end. Therefore, according to the Marxist worldview, there is no life after death. There's no heaven and there's no hell. What you do in this life is all that there's to it. Now, we, to some extent, can understand what was appealing for the young workers who spent hours every day in the factories for little during the Industrial Revolution. The problems that Karl Marx addressed were very real. There was a terrible culture of taking advantage of those that actually did the hard work for a nation. Now, that being said, the solution was not to embrace the economic and cultural worldview of socialistic communism. We say today that this simply leads to a shift in the one who is the tyrant. It doesn't lead to any real solution. Now, as believers, you and I are able to point to a clearer answer to the real problems of suppression and poverty and exploitation that Marx failed to solve. The solution is not to simply offer a different economic system, such as our own capitalism. In our economic system, there's still exploitation, although a good case could be made that it happens less. No, as believers, we have a far greater hope than a political party or an economic system or even in presidents. In fact, the Bible repeatedly warns us for that those that place our hope in these things will be put to shame. David writes in Psalm 146 the following about trusting the things in this world. He says, 146 verse 3, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man, in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth, and on that very day his plans perish. But blessed is the one whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord his God." As believers, we place our hope in God, who will come one day to make all that is wrong right and to create a perfect state where he alone is worshiped in complete joy and light. And until that day, we are careful to, yes, care for those around us, but ultimately prioritize our love and devotion for God, who promises so much more than any state or philosophy ever could.